When I moved into my new apartment, I was excited. It was a fresh start, a chance to escape the monotony of my previous life and find a place where I could truly be myself. The building was old, filled with character and stories, with creaky floorboards and the kind of charm that made you feel at home right away. But it wasn't long before I learned that charm can hide darkness. My neighbors were quiet, which I appreciated. I had always been the type to prefer solitude, finding solace in the absence of noise. The apartment next to mine, however, was a different story. The first time I heard them was late one night, well after midnight. It started with muffled sounds, thumps and crashes, accompanied by a deep, gravelly voice that seemed to be arguing with someone. I sat up in bed, straining to listen, curiosity prickling at my senses. I told myself it was just the usual late-night squabbles that happen in apartment complexes. People fighting, breaking up, or simply losing their temper. It wasn't any of my business. I pulled the blanket up around my shoulders and tried to ignore it, but the noises continued, growing more intense. The next day, I caught a glimpse of my neighbor in the hallway. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a scruffy beard and an air of unkemptness about him. He had a rough look, and I quickly averted my eyes, not wanting to make any sort of connection. I didn't want to get involved in whatever was happening behind that door. Days turned into weeks, and the noises continued each night, dragging on with the same unsettling rhythm. The fights escalated, and I began to hear the sounds of breaking glass, followed by a tense silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I wanted to call the police, but a part of me hesitated. What if it was nothing? What if I made things worse? I didn't want to be that neighbor, the nosy one who called in every little disturbance. Then one evening, everything changed. I had just returned home from work, exhausted and ready to sink into the comfort of my couch. I had planned on a quiet night in, but as I settled in, I heard the unmistakable sound of something heavy hitting the floor next door, followed by a woman's terrified scream. Adrenaline shot through me, and I sprang up from the couch, my heart racing. This was different. This was serious. I couldn't just ignore it anymore. I grabbed my phone, hesitating for just a moment as I considered calling 911. But what if I was wrong? What if I was overreacting? Then I heard it again. A loud crash, followed by a sickening thud, and the scream pierced through the walls like a knife. I didn't think twice. I rushed out of my apartment and knocked on the neighbor's door, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello? Is everything okay in there?" I shouted, my voice trembling slightly. Silence. Then I knocked harder, fear gripping me. "Open the door, please." After a moment that felt like an eternity, the door creaked open just a crack. The neighbor stood there, his face flushed, eyes wild and panicked. "What do you want?" he barked, his voice low and threatening. I heard a scream. "I think someone needs help," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "Is everything all right?" He hesitated, and for a moment, I thought he might slam the door in my face. But instead, he opened it wider, revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. The living room was a mess, furniture overturned, shards of glass scattered across the floor, and in the corner, a woman sat huddled against the wall, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Stay out of this," he growled, pushing the door wider, forcing me to step back. "It's none of your business." I felt my heart drop as I looked at the woman. She was trembling, and there was something in her eyes that screamed desperation. I couldn't just walk away now. "Please, just let me help," I pleaded, my voice rising with urgency. "She needs help." The neighbor's expression twisted, his jaw tightening. I said, "Stay out of it. You don't know what you're talking about." The woman looked up at me, and in that brief moment, our eyes met. There was something haunting about her gaze, a mix of fear and gratitude. It was enough to push me over the edge. Before I knew it, I was pushing past him, stepping into the apartment. "Get away from her!" I shouted, my heart racing. I didn't know what I was getting into, But I couldn't just stand by. The neighbor lunged at me, but I was quicker. I dodged to the side and rushed to the woman, crouching down beside her. "Are you okay?" I whispered, my voice low and steady. "Can you walk?" She nodded slightly, but her eyes darted to the neighbor, who was recovering from his surprise, anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Get out," he shouted, advancing toward us. I could feel panic creeping in, but I focused on the woman. "We need to go now," I said, grabbing her arm gently. "Come on." But before we could move, he was on us. He shoved me hard, and I stumbled back, hitting the edge of the coffee table. Pain shot through my side, but I gritted my teeth and pushed myself back up. "Leave her alone," I yelled, my voice hoarse. The neighbor's face was twisted in rage. He turned to the woman, and I could see something change in his eyes, something darker. "You're not going anywhere," he hissed, grabbing her by the arm and dragging her back against the wall. "No, let her go," I shouted, rushing toward them. Adrenaline pumped through my veins. In that moment, everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. I could see the fear in her eyes, the desperation as she fought against him, and it fueled my anger. I lunged forward, grabbing him by the shoulder and pulling him away from her. He turned on me with a snarl, and in that instant, I realized how badly I had miscalculated. The neighbor was strong, much stronger than I had anticipated. He shoved me back again, and I felt my back hit the wall. The world spun around me for a moment, and I had to shake my head to regain focus. "Get out of my apartment," he shouted, his voice like a thunderclap. But I wasn't done. I wasn't leaving without her. I pushed off the wall, rushing toward him again, and this time I saw the glint of something metallic in his hand. A knife. My heart dropped as he brandished it, the blade glinting in the low light. In a flash, everything changed. The woman screamed, and without thinking, I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as the knife cut through the space where I had just been. I rolled to my feet, adrenaline surging through me, and I could see the fear etched across her face. "Run!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Get out of here!" But the neighbor was already moving toward her, knife raised, a look of pure rage on his face. In a split-second decision, I charged at him, tackling him to the ground. The knife skidded across the floor, clattering away as I wrestled him down. We hit the ground hard, and I felt the air rush out of my lungs. He was stronger than I expected, but I used everything I had. I grabbed his wrists, trying to pin him down, but he thrashed violently beneath me. "Get off me," he growled, twisting and rolling. I could feel the heat of his anger, the wildness in his movements. But then I heard it, the sound of footsteps coming from the hallway. It was the building security guard, responding to the chaos. I hadn't even realized I had screamed for help. "Police! Open up!" A voice shouted from outside the apartment. The neighbor's eyes widened, and in that instant, I seized my chance. With all my strength, I pushed him away and scrambled to my feet, turning toward the door just as it swung open. The security guard rushed in, followed by 2 police officers. They took in the scene, me, panting and disheveled, the neighbor still on the ground, and the woman trembling and wide-eyed in the corner. "Get down on the ground," one of the officers shouted, and the neighbor's defiance evaporated as he raised his hands in surrender. I stepped back, my heart racing. As they moved in to apprehend him, the woman rushed into my arms, shaking uncontrollably. I held her tightly, relief flooding through me as the officers secured the neighbor. "It's okay, you're safe now," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. After what felt like hours, the chaos settled. The police took statements from both of us, and I learned the truth. The woman was the neighbor's partner, trapped in a cycle of fear and manipulation. She had tried to leave before, but he always found her, always brought her back. It was a nightmare she couldn't escape on her own. As the officers led the neighbor away in handcuffs, I felt a mix of emotions. I was relieved that she was safe, but the weight of what had just happened pressed heavily on my chest. I had gotten involved in something I had no idea how to navigate, and it had nearly cost us both. In the days that followed, I checked in on the woman as she recovered, helping her navigate the aftermath of the traumatic experience. The police found evidence of abuse and had arrested the neighbor for good, but the scars he left behind would take time to heal. As she began to reclaim her life, I found myself drawn into her journey, a bond forged through trauma. I learned to appreciate the little things, the quiet moments, the laughter shared over coffee, and the newfound sense of safety in her presence. What started as a simple noise in the night had turned into a harrowing experience. But in the end, it reminded me of the strength of the human spirit. Sometimes, the most terrifying situations can lead to unexpected connections and resilience. But even now, as I sit in my apartment, I can still hear echoes of that night, of muffled sounds behind closed doors, and the reminder that sometimes the darkness hides secrets we can't imagine. I no longer take solitude for granted. Instead, I find strength in the community around me, knowing that in the face of danger, there's always hope.